Now, in South Africa, a child's future is often determined before they even step into a classroom, with early childhood development centres making this possible for most of our kids. Now, some face significant struggles, and that's largely due to inadequate infrastructure and limited resources, such as inadequate running water and proper sanitation. And in response, the Department of Basic Education last year launched a mass registration drive to ensure that these centres have the required necessities. To also assist, non-profit organisations have also stepped up to upskill struggling centres with learning and training requirements. And to talk to us more about this, we joined virtually now by Santa Shoebox Project CEO, Deb Zelezniak. Deb, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you so much for having me, Sakina. Good morning.
This is such an important sector, Deb, and I think people are starting to understand the importance of early childhood development, perhaps now better than in the past. But can you just start by just painting a picture for us of early childhood development centres, the ones that you've seen and experienced over the years, and just paint a picture for us of what is happening?
You touched on it very eloquently. Many of our ECDs, early childhood development centres, are woefully under-resourced. It starts with infrastructure, of course. We know how many of these ECDs are run from women's homes, from hastily erected shacks or informal structures on plots, and they are under-resourced also in terms of training. The women who so passionately commit to caring for other women's children are themselves not empowered to feel adequate in their role as educators in the all-important Thrive by 5, first 1,000 days, second 1,000 days of a child's development.
And you know, again, the department and the government, through the department, of course, recognizing how critical this is, Deb. And then you had the Department of Education putting out this mass registration drive that aims to improve the standards that you spoke about. But of course, we saw this at a centre down the road here in Coronationville that we visited a few months ago, that many of these centres cannot comply for various reasons, be it due to a resource shortage or, you know, some other reasons. But what sort of strategies can be adopted and adapted to support some of these under-resourced centres?
Look, our recent budget took huge strides in the right direction with the raising of the daily child grant from 17 Rand, where it had been unchanged for 7 years, to 24 Rand per day per child. It's still insufficient. We know what 24 Rand can achieve in our current economy. We also know that Minister Garube is impassioned and committed. The Banopele registration rollout, which was launched recently at the Banapele Early Childhood Development Leadership Summit, has a magnificent footprint of reach. I mean, they're looking to enroll an additional 700,000 children in early childhood development by the end of this year. It's an enormous task. The budget does support it, and I'm really pleased to have heard that President Ramaphosa supports it with such vigor. He touched on the fact that the decision should have been made 30 years ago, but it's been made now. The registration is going extremely well. The challenge, of course, is to tailor it to our vast country. You know, the same challenges don't apply to urban ECDs that apply to rural ECDs. And I think that's going to be the hinge of success for the Banapele program.
And you know, Deb, you touch on the allocations that have been stagnant for so long for these children. And we know that, you know, there are limited resources available, government making that investment, but of course they are limited in how far they can take this. And this is, of course, where NPOs continue to fill that gap coming in. And there are critical issues here, the training, the teacher and learner support materials that are needed. And you know, how are the NGOs faring in this space? Because I would imagine we do need greater corporate cooperation as well.
Absolutely. And that too is being encouraged by government. Investment in SED and socioeconomic development is a tax break for businesses, and it's a requirement of businesses to invest in SED. And, NPOs that have been operating in the educational sector for decades need to leverage their experience, the fact that they're experts in service delivery under very difficult circumstances often. And I strongly urge business to investigate with whom they invest their socioeconomic development budget, because we know that it's not always easy to deliver on one's promises, but it's absolutely mission critical. What we don't have insufficient supplies. What we have is difficulty of delivery. And I think it really needs to be addressed, especially in rural areas. It's not insurmountable. Distribution of books for literacy, distribution of teaching resources, even infrastructure, it is accessible. It simply needs successful delivery. It's something I can't stress enough. The grant needs to reach thousands of people countrywide. It needs a mechanism to ensure that that grant is received, because there are challenges. ECD caregivers do not equally access that grant countrywide. Things need to be refined, but I do believe that the DBE, the Department of Basic Education, is making huge inroads in the right direction for the first time in a long time.
So what are some of those challenges, Deb?
I always start with training. I think if the teachers themselves don't feel empowered to train, to have adequate access to the curriculum framework, they simply are not going to succeed. I also see huge challenges, but also opportunities in the new rating for grade R. It's now compulsory for children to attend grade R. It is the first year of formal schooling. And I see massive opportunity for ECD to convert or to include in their offering grade R teaching. And again, it goes back to training. Many of these women have decades of experience. They understand the requirements. They don't, for example, often have access to the very basics like the digital world. They don't have access to data. I mean, this needs to be looked at. It's not something we should have to discuss in the 21st century. Everybody should have equal access to affordable data.
So therefore, inset training is not a nice to have. It's not a luxury. It is a necessity. And as you say, many of these women, as childminders in many instances, have years of experience, but it is now important that they have the capacity to implement a curriculum. And therefore, you would imagine that things like recognition of prior learning would have to come into play with trying to accredit and get some of these teachers qualified then. That's another issue that I would imagine is quite urgent, Deb.
It's enormously urgent, and there are significant barriers to entry. Of course, cost is one of them. To qualify for your NQF level 4 or 5 costs a few £1,000, and it also has just been made even more rigorous, which is a good thing in some ways, but it does then exclude, as you point out, decades of experience of women who innately, over the years, have learned how to produce the goods under very trying circumstances. NPOs also come into play in the training sector. There are magnificent offerings ranging from 40-week lesson plans, which touch on exactly those first 5 years, developmental milestones. They also serve to highlight children who perhaps would fall through the cracks because of all manner of challenges, auditory challenges, visual challenges, never mind intellectual challenges. So NPOs can play an enormous role in just that gap between formal training and no training at all. It doesn't have to necessarily be an NQF qualification, as long as the teaching resources are there and the support is there. We have an enormous network in the NPO sector. And I think, again, to leverage that experience as something of enormous value is critical right now with this grade R development that we're facing, because formal schools simply do not have the resources to include an additional classroom or 2 or 3. in their limited offering, in the limited space that they have, and teachers and budget. It's a challenge that extends all the way from ECD through to matric.
And I'm just looking at some of the visuals that we are using right now as this interview is playing, and just noting little things as we talk about, the pedagogy. For example, the font on some of there's the one that actually caught my attention, where you need to teach those teachers which is the correct font to use when you are teaching little children how to write, because it can't be in caps and all of those things. But as you say, that does not take away from the fact that there is knowledge that has been built up over years. It's simply a matter of bringing them on up to speed, so to speak, pedagogically.
Absolutely. We've recently had World Book Day, and we touched a lot on exactly what it means to children to be able to access books in the first 5 years of their educational process, which is in fact what ECD is. It's an educational space. It's not simply a place of safety, or it shouldn't be anyway. And so many of the ECDs have fewer than 10 books available to the children in their care. And what this impacts on is the cognitive development of those children. And what that means, cognitive development refers not just to literacy, of course. It refers to numeracy. It refers to psychosocial skills like listening or empathy, managing emotional responses, and then that all-important critical thinking and problem solving. If we address those needs in the first 5 to 6 years of a child's life, by the time they enter formal schooling and by the time they reach matric, that matric pass rate will take care of itself. And that focus can in fact be shifted from a simple number at the end of the year to an educational journey that creates a successful contributing adult.
Oh, Deb, can talk about this for hours and hours, because this is, of course, one of the critical areas that if we're talking about development of our nation, we need to get ECD right, failing which we will continue to lag. But unfortunately, we have to leave it there for today. But definitely, we must have a follow-up conversation and broaden it, because I think it's also important for parents to understand the importance of ECD centers and the education that's provided there. Thank you so much, Deb. That was the CEO of Santa Shoebox Project, Deb Zelezniak, talking to us about ECD centers in South Africa, the struggles that they face with things like basic infrastructure and resources, and also the crucial role that NPOs play in supporting these centers when government funding falls short. And as I say, it's something that we'll have to pick up again.